In the year 155 BC, the city of Athens sent 3 philosophers to Rome on a diplomatic mission. On paper, it sounds completely routine. A diplomatic errand, one city-state sorting out a legal dispute with the dominant power of the Mediterranean world. The kind of thing that happened all the time in the ancient world and was forgotten almost as soon as it was resolved. But what happened on this trip was anything but routine. The 3 philosophers, a Stoic named Diogenes of Babylon, a peripatetic named Critylus, and an academic skeptic named Carneades, arrived in Rome, and while they waited for the Senate to hear their case, gave public lectures. Rome had never heard anything quite like it. The lectures drew enormous crowds. Young aristocrats, the sons of senators, future consuls and generals, all sat in rapt attention. Philosophy as a living practice, as a discipline that could genuinely reshape how a person thought and lived, was something most educated Romans had heard of in the abstract, but now they were experiencing it in person. One older senator, watching the crowds pressing around these Greek lecturers, was reportedly furious. He'd spent his life building Rome into a power, and he was not at all pleased to see its young men being seduced by foreign ideas. His name was Cato the Elder, and he lobbied the Senate to resolve the diplomatic business quickly and send these philosophers home before they could do any more damage. The Senate complied, and the philosophers went home. But the ideas stayed. They always do. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. I'm Tim Howell. In the first 3 episodes, we built the Greek foundation, Zeno's shipwreck, the Painted Porch, and the 2 great builders who followed him, Cleanthes and Chrysippus. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Stoicism was the most intellectually rigorous and widely practiced philosophical tradition in the Greco-Roman world. But philosophy doesn't change history by sitting in academies. It changes history when it reaches people with power and decisions to make. And in 155 BC, it began its journey to the most powerful city on earth. Today, we're going to follow that journey. We look at the world that was ready to receive Stoicism, the key figures who carried it westwards, and crucially, what happened to the philosophy when a very practical, very political, and very un-Greek culture got hold of it. Because Rome didn't simply import Stoicism, it transformed it. And in transforming it, created something that still shapes how we think about ethics, law, leadership, and the inner life today. To understand why Stoicism took root in Rome the way it did, you need to step back and look at the world it was moving through. When Zeno founded his school in Athens around 300 BC, the Greek world had just been turned upside down by Alexander the Great. The old order, the independent city-states, the intimate civic cultures of Athens and Sparta and Corinth had all been swept aside, and in its place was something new and genuinely disorientating, a vast Hellenistic world stretching from Greece to Egypt to the borders of India, where the old certainties of citizenship and community had dissolved into something much larger and far less legible. This matters. Political philosophers have long noted that philosophy tends to turn inward precisely when the external political world becomes unstable or unresponsive to individual action. When you can't meaningfully participate in shaping your political community, you start asking a different question. Not how should we govern our city, but how should I govern myself? Stoicism was, among many other things, an answer to that question. And it was formulated at exactly the historical moment when that question had become urgent. Rome in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC was going through its own version of that same crisis, but in reverse. The Roman Republic had grown through a combination of military genius and political ruthlessness, from a city-state into a Mediterranean empire. But the institutions of the Republic, designed for a city, for a community of citizens who could know each other and deliberate together, were creaking badly under the weight of empire. The old Roman virtues, gravitas, pietas, virtus, and dignitas, or in English, seriousness, duty, courage, and reputation, were virtues designed for a particular kind of citizen in a particular kind of community. As Rome expanded and as the stakes of political life grew enormous and the temptations of power became almost overwhelming, these virtues needed a philosophical foundation they had never previously required. Enter Stoicism, a philosophy built around virtue as the only genuine good, around the exercise of reason under pressure, around the idea that circumstances can't excuse moral failure, around the cosmopolitan vision that all human beings share a common rational nature and deserve to be treated accordingly. It was, in a very real sense, exactly what Rome needed, and the Romans were sophisticated enough to know it. The man responsible for Stoicism's successful transplantation to Roman soil was a Greek philosopher named Panetius of Rhodes. Panetius was born around 185 BC on the island of Rhodes, itself a cosmopolitan trading hub, a natural meeting point between Greek intellectual life and Roman political ambition. He studied in Athens under the Stoic teachers of his day, eventually becoming head of the school himself. But it wasn't in Athens that he made his most lasting contribution. Sometime around 140 BC, Panetius attached himself to the household of Scipio Aemilianus, one of the most powerful and culturally sophisticated men in Rome. Scipio was a general of genius, the destroyer of Carthage, and also a man of genuine intellectual curiosity, who had gathered around him the most brilliant minds of his generation. This gathering, known to history as the Scipionic Circle, was one of those rare moments when political power and philosophical seriousness genuinely met. The group included the historian Polybius, the playwright Terence, and now Panetius. They debated ethics, statecraft, the nature of justice, the proper relationship between the individual and the state. Panetius was at the centre of those conversations for years, shaping the thinking of the Roman elite in ways that no formal lecture series could ever have achieved. But Panetius didn't just export the Stoicism of Chrysippus to Rome wholesale. He adapted it, and the adaptations he made tell us something important about the difference between Greek and Roman sensibilities. The original Stoic ideal, the sage, the perfectly wise person who has achieved complete virtue and is never shaken by anything, had always been a somewhat theoretical construct. Even Chrysippus had acknowledged that the perfect sage was vanishingly rare. Perhaps one had existed in all of human history, he said. Perhaps. Panetius was practical enough to see that this wasn't what Roman politicians and soldiers actually needed. He shifted the emphasis. Instead of asking how to become a perfect sage, he asked, how should a good person, a real person with real duties, real relationships, real pressures, conduct their life and make their decisions? Now, this was a significant move. Panetius brought Stoic ethics down from the heights of philosophical perfection and into the practical world of offices and obligations, of military command and civic duty. He wrote a work called On Duties, now lost, that was so influential that it became the direct basis for Cicero's Dichotomy, one of the most widely read ethical texts in Western history. Through Panetius, Stoicism stopped being a philosophy for idealists and became a philosophy for people who had real work to do in a complex world and often compromised world. The Stoic ethics that Panetius planted in Roman intellectual life grew over the next 2 centuries into something that shaped Roman law, Roman governance, and Roman ideas about the nature of humanity in ways we are still living with. So let me give you 3 specific examples, because the vague claim that Stoicism influenced Rome is far less interesting than understanding precisely how. The first is natural law, the Stoic idea that there is a rational principle underlying the universe, the logos, and that human reason allows us to perceive it and align our laws and institutions with it, became the philosophical foundation for Roman jurisprudence. The great Roman legal theorists Cicero, Gaius, Ulpian drew explicitly on Stoic natural law theory to argue that certain rights and obligations belong to all human beings, regardless of citizenship or legal status. This is not a small thing. Roman law, built on the Stoic foundation, became the basis for the legal system of most of modern Europe, and through European legal tradition, much of the world beyond. When we talk today about natural rights, universal human dignity, equality before the law, we're actually speaking a language whose philosophical grammar was largely written by the Stoics. The second example is cosmopolitanism in practice. The Stoic idea that all human beings are citizens of a common rational community, that the slave and the emperor share the same fundamental nature and deserve the same basic moral consideration, was philosophically radical in any era. In Rome, it had practical consequences. It's no coincidence that two of the most ardent Stoics in Roman history stand at opposite ends of the social spectrum. Epictetus was a slave, Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, and both, from those utterly different positions, reached the same conclusions about what mattered and how to live. We'll spend full episodes on each of them, but hold that image for now. A philosophy that speaks with equal authority to the person in chains and the person on the throne. That really is something remarkable. The third example is the ethics of leadership. Roman Stoicism, especially as developed by Seneca, who advised the Emperor Nero, and later by Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor, produced one of history's most sophisticated accounts of what it means to hold power with integrity. The Stoic leader wasn't supposed to be the strongest, the most feared, or even the most successful in conventional terms. The Stoic leader was supposed to be the most virtuous, to lead by example, to serve rather than to exploit, to hold power lightly and use it in service of the common good. That ideal didn't always survive contact with actual Roman politics, it has to be said, but as a standard against which leaders could be measured and found wanting, it was enormously influential. I want to pause here and think about something this journey from Athens to Rome illustrates particularly well. When a philosophy moves from one culture to another, it changes. It has to. The questions a Greek philosopher in a city-state were trying to answer are not the same as the questions a Roman senator in an empire was trying to answer. The vocabulary, the social context, the practical pressures, all of it's different. A philosophy that can't adapt to new contexts just won't survive. But here's what's striking about Stoicism's Roman adaptation. The core didn't change. The central claim that virtue is the only genuine good, that the quality of your inner life is determined by the quality of your judgments, that external circumstances can't touch your fundamental freedom as a rational being, that all remained. Pernicius adjusted the emphasis. He made the philosophy more practical, more oriented towards real-world duties, but he didn't water it down. He didn't make it comfortable. He made it applicable. That distinction between diluting a philosophy and making it applicable matters enormously. And it's a challenge that faces anyone who tries to bring Stoicism into modern life. There's a version of modern Stoicism that's been so thoroughly adapted to contemporary sensibilities that it's lost its edge. The challenging parts, the insistence on virtue over comfort, the willingness to endure voluntary hardship, the genuine acceptance of mortality, have been quietly set aside, leaving something closer to resilience-flavoured productivity advice. Pernicius shows us a different model. Engage seriously with your context, understand what your moment needs, adapt the emphasis, but hold the core. That's as good a description of what this channel is trying to achieve as any I can offer. Before we close, I want to spend a moment on a figure who doesn't quite fit any of our categories, but is essential to understanding how Stoic ideas reached the modern world. Marcus Tullius Cicero was not a Stoic. He was an academic skeptic by philosophical affiliation, and he could be sharply critical of Stoic doctrines, particularly the doctrine of the sage and the all-or-nothing account of virtue. He found it too rigid, too removed from the texture of real political life. But Cicero was also the greatest Latin prose stylist of his age, a man of voracious intellectual appetite, and someone who understood that the idea of the Greek philosophical schools needed to be made available in Latin if they were going to shape Roman culture in any lasting way. So he wrote. He wrote On the Nature of the Gods, which transmits Stoic theology alongside its rivals. He wrote Tusculan Disputations, which explores Stoic ideas on death and the emotions. And most importantly, he wrote the Ophices, On Duties, directly based on Pernicius, addressed to his son, describing in lucid, practical Latin the ethical framework that a Roman man of affairs should live by. The Ophices became, over the following centuries, one of the most copied and most read texts in Western Europe. It was the ethical handbook of the Roman ruling class, then of the medieval church, and then of the Renaissance humanists. When the great thinkers of the 15th and 16th centuries were reconstructing classical ethics, they were largely reading Cicero, and through Cicero absorbing Pernicius, and through Pernicius drinking from the well of Zeno and Chrysippus, and all the way back to the Painted Porch. The lines of transmission are long and often indirect, but they are real. And following them is how we understand not just where Stoicism came from, but why it keeps coming back. There's a line from Book 1 of Cicero's De Officiis I want to leave you with. He's paraphrasing Pernicius, who's drawing on Zeno, in a chain of transmission that runs back almost 300 years, and yet the words land as if they were written this morning. We are not born for ourselves alone. Our country claims a share of our being, and our friends a share, and since, as the Stoics hold, everything that the earth produces is created for the use of men, and men too are born for the sake of men, that they may be able mutually to help one another, we ought to follow nature as our guide and contribute to the general good. Now repeat after me. We are not born for ourselves alone. In an age that's made a virtue of self-optimization, that frames almost every question as a question about personal performance and individual advantage. There's something genuinely countercultural about that claim, something that cuts against the grain of a lot of modern self-help culture, including some of the culture that's grown up around Stoicism itself. The Stoics didn't develop their philosophy to help you be more productive. They developed it to help you be more human, more fully a member of the rational community that all beings share. The personal practice and the social obligation were always, for them, two sides of the same coin. Your reflection for this episode: where in your own life do you feel the tension between what's good for you personally and what's good for the people around you, and how do you navigate it? The Stoics believed that tension wasn't something to be resolved in favour of one side or the other. It was something to be held wisely for a lifetime. In the next episode, we arrive at the first of the three great Roman Stoics, and arguably the most human of them all, Seneca, lawyer, playwright, millionaire, political survivor, and the writer whose letters on time, friendship, and the art of living remain, 2,000 years on, almost unbearably relevant. His story is complicated in the best possible way, and I can't wait to share it with you. If you found today useful, please like and subscribe. It makes an enormous difference to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.